Assassin's Creed. It is a lot of things. Over the years, we have seen a lot of changes, some which split the community into multiple sections. And especially in the past few years, there have been several voices saying this is not Assassin's Creed anymore over the last few titles. My voice being one of them. So then, what is Assassin's Creed? On 13th November, the day Assassin's Creed was born, this seems like the perfect question to discuss. So now obviously, this is going to involve spoilers for the franchise because we are going to be discussing the franchise. But before I get into that, like, subscribe, you know the drill, yeah, do all that, and let's get started. So I am what you would call a modern fan of the series because I didn't start playing the series with Assassin's Creed 1. In fact, I started with Assassin's Creed Black Flag, a game that is kind of also notorious for people saying that that is not an Assassin's Creed game. So regardless of all of that Assassin's Creed 1 is where the series began, and that is where I'll start here today. The first Assassin's Creed game was something special. Never before had a game done things that this game was doing. The atmosphere was perfect, the missions were repetitive, yes, but it gave you crucial pieces of information for what you needed to be. An assassin. Someone who blends with the crowd only to strike from it and retreat back into it. With the perfect planning, you could get right up to your target with no one being the wiser. And after you're done with your assassination, then came the next crucial aspect of the gameplay: escape. Probably one of the most important aspects in any Assassin's Creed game, and it was very well done in Assassin's Creed 1, at least in my opinion. The world design was excellent, it promoted you finding routes for yourself. The parkour mechanics, sometimes, even if it is unrefined, it is still a really good system. And keep in mind, this game came out way back 15 years ago. So both the parkour system and the level design really helped you with that, and you felt that sense of trying to escape after you have just assassinated someone and go back to be a hidden one. Well, you're not really the hidden one, you are an assassin, but you become a hidden person. And that wasn't the meat of it either. So what makes Assassin's Creed 1 truly special is not just the gameplay. The gameplay is a huge aspect of it, as I'll come to later in the video, but it's not just the gameplay, it is also the assassinations, it's the story. Now, in the very first scene, when Altair starts off, he immediately breaks all three tenets of the creed. He fails to hide in plain sight, he compromises the Brotherhood by bringing the entire Templar Order to Masyaf by being chased, and also stay your blade from the flesh of the innocents. He kills an innocent man while making it to the temple. In his mentor's eyes, he is a disgrace, even if his talents are undeniable. So his mentor sets him to assassinate 9 men. 9 men who were harming the world in their evil ways. Or so we thought, or so I thought. Except, that's not what the game is about. Turns out, while their methods were questionable at best, they were all for a greater purpose, the purpose of peace. With each target, Altair learned something more about the group he was up against, while also learning more about his own creed. The conversations he had with Al-Mualim really set the tone for the game. And it is that progression, it is that conflict that makes this game great. Everything here is grey. No one is perfect in their ideals or executions. Everyone is simply trying to shape the world in their own ideals and is willing to take the actions necessary for it. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. While this phrase is most associated with assassins, this also truly applies for the Templars, because at the end of the day, their actions reflect this very statement. But as nuanced and well written as the main story was, that wasn't the end of it. It was all simply a backdrop, a distraction. Because in reality, a bartender named Desmond Miles was trapped to the Animus, being forced to relive the memories of his ancestor, Altair. Altair, of course, is our protagonist. The target Altair was going up against, they are Templars, people who sought peace with control. The people who kidnapped Desmond Miles, Abstergo, the modern day Templars. And even now they are looking for their ultimate goal, the Apple of Eden, an artifact that would allow them to control the rest of the human race in hopes that with no dissent, there might finally be peace. And thus Desmond is being forced to relive his ancestors' memories. Now Altair's story is about him trying to understand what the world is, because he was rash, he was reckless, he was a bit cocky. I think we can be honest about that. But he learns, he matures throughout the game. And Desmond, viewing the memories of his ancestors, finally realizes why he needs to be an assassin, something he was trained for since he was a child. The artifact though, the Piece of Eden, those were created by the ones who came before, the Isu. The entities humans saw as gods because they were more advanced. And it was them who created these various pieces of Eden to control humanity. But in the end, they were wiped out by a catastrophe, the Ragnarok, and it was fast approaching again. Now, this part of the story was of course not in Assassin's Creed 1, but that is what we built up on throughout the Ezio trilogy. So why am I discussing all this? It is to establish what these games are. In its heart, it is a story about two opposing worldviews, two solutions to a problem that don't really work on their own. And this is a very important part that I'm saying right now because it is something that was explored later in the series. Now, I've seen a lot of people say that they don't particularly like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Origins, or Valhalla, one of those three, all three, whatever. And well, I myself am among those people. I do not like the modern direction of Assassin's Creed. But the question for the day is whether or not these are Assassin's Creed games. And so I'm going to take what I've just said in the last 7 minutes or so, and I'm going to apply them to Odyssey and Valhalla. And I already did apply it to Odyssey and Valhalla. That's why this video exists. The short answer is yes, they are very much Assassin's Creed games. The long answer, well, stay with me. So let's analyze the two latest entries to the franchise, Odyssey and Valhalla. So let's start with the eagle-bearing Misthios. So Cassandra, is she an assassin? No. Does it matter? No. The very first game established that they didn't always follow the tenets of the creed. Altair himself broke tenets of the creed. Yes, he was punished for it, but he was an assassin. Black Flag later gave a better look at both these orders from an outsider's perspective. And now we move on to Cassandra, who is in ancient Greece, where these ideologies aren't really clashing. They haven't really begun yet. Now you can say that yes, the Order of the Ancients did exist, and Cassandra does encounter them in the DLC. I will go to that later. But the Cult of Cosmos, in my opinion, is just not equivalent to Templars at all. They were an extremely corrupt organization. It's not like the Templars aren't corrupt. It's just that the Templars still have a vision. The Templars are supposed to have a vision. The cult never had that. The cult were all just about greed. And so that was the big problem with Odyssey, with the main story. The main story of Odyssey doesn't really do justice to Cassandra herself, because there are so many inconsistencies with the story itself. But it is still an Assassin's Creed story, because it does give some context to the ones who came before. And now, putting the main story aside and its mistakes aside, we do need to talk about the DLCs of Odyssey. So that was the Legacy of the First Blade and the Fate of Atlantis. Now, I have complained about Odyssey a lot. And if you're familiar with the channel, you probably know I have done it a lot and I have said all I needed to say. But these are not the things I'm considering right now. Those were mistakes. Mistakes happen. What was the core premise of these DLCs? Well, the core premise was that we had a person, Darius, or as he was also known, Artabanus. We had one of the most influential figures among the assassins in this DLC. And he, of course, assassinated Xerxes. And that moment, that scene was one of the best scenes in any Assassin's Creed game. Darius assassinating Xerxes is the absolute best. Okay, there are a few scenes that come close, but it is one of the best at the very least. So even with the DLC, we saw the conflict between the Order of the Ancients, and we saw Darius trying his best to keep his ideals alive. And with the end of the DLC, now that we know that essentially Aya or Amunet is a descendant of Darius, it is very possible that Darius, while being in Egypt, while raising Cassandra's child, he may have put his own values into those children, and we saw a few Magi's as well in that sequence. And it is possible that some of the Magi traditions were about Darius's approach to getting to his enemies, or Darius's approach about the world, about his worldviews. So it is very much possible now that the order that was set up in Origins is directly connected in a way to Darius and his principles. So that, in a way, in my opinion, even though I feel like they could have probably done better with this, in fact, I'm not even going to say probably, yes, they could have done better. But, it is how it is. Mistakes are made. But that doesn't mean that Odyssey is not an Assassin's Creed game. And I haven't even gone into the Fate of Atlantis DLC. Because yes, the DLCs were boring, they were repetitive, but there were good moments in them. There were some genuine moments that gave us some really good idea about what the Isu were thinking, what they were doing, the kind of projects they were involved in, the kind of problems they were facing. Throughout the entire 2 DLCs, Odyssey did a lot to connect itself to the Assassin's Creed lore. Now, some of it, yes, they did break the lore. Some of it was really dumb, like the knowledge boxes. You open boxes to get knowledge, which, by the way, would be really handy in the real world. And if someone is thinking of doing that, please do that. I do not like studying. If I could just open a box and just understand calculus suddenly and never forget about it, that would be pretty neat. And if the Isu actually did develop that, that would be pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. So now we move on from Odyssey. Now, the reason why Odyssey was so important to me is because, as I've said before, I personally do not like Odyssey. But even I have to sit down, if I had to sit down and objectively evaluate Odyssey, yes, it did add a lot to the lore. Some of it was good. Some of it was dumb. So now we move on to Valhalla. And I've seen a lot of people say, Valhalla absolutely is not an Assassin's Creed game. Because why are we going up against dragons or one big wolf and all that stuff? And while I have my thoughts on that, again, I disagree with the notion that Valhalla is not an Assassin's Creed game. And I don't disagree that Valhalla's gameplay, at least for me, just is absolute garbage because stealth doesn't work and I don't really enjoy raiding and stuff. So for me, it never really worked. But in terms of the story itself, in terms of Eivor and Sigurd's story, in terms of what was happening with the Aesir Isu, in terms of what was happening in the modern day, we finally have a game which perfectly captures what Assassin's Creed is about, at least in terms of its story. Yes, the gameplay was shit, and that's also the case in Odyssey. I'm not going to mention that. But in terms of its story, these are very much Assassin's Creed games. Because in Valhalla, yes, you are not an assassin, but that doesn't matter. You are still going up against what would become the Templars. And even without that, we are still exploring the Isu. We are still exploring the problems they faced or what they did to survive. Things like that. Things like that are essential to the lore of Assassin's Creed. So yes, even if it's not Assassins versus Templars, or say if it's just Assassin versus Templar, there is no Isu involved, or if say there is Assassins versus Templars, there are the Isu, but there is no modern day, it would still be an Assassin's Creed game. Because Assassin's Creed is all these things and also none of these things. It just depends on how they strike the balance. Because there has to be a balance struck when you need to have some specific gameplay, some specific story beats, some specific storylines. It's kind of difficult to not overdo it. And it's also difficult to not underdo it. Sometimes some games have very little of these things, like Odyssey did. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether Odyssey is a good game or not, but what I will say, it is definitely an Assassin's Creed game. it had no assassins in it. It had, for all intents and purposes, no Templars in it. But it is still very much an Assassin's Creed game. And that's where my final point comes around. Now, I have been guilty in the past of saying this as well, that Odyssey is not an Assassin's Creed game. But even when I have to objectively look at these games in the series, I have to admit, it did have some things from an Assassin's Creed game. It did justify that name in its title. It didn't do much to justify it, but it did justify it. So yeah, that's my big takeaway for this video. The short answer was, yes, they are Assassin's Creed games. Every single Assassin's Creed game that they have made so far, there is no reason for us to discount them from being an Assassin's Creed game. Yes, some had good gameplay, some had gameplay that didn't really click with others, some liked the older style of gameplay, some liked the newer style of gameplay. We saw a huge boost. We saw a great reaction to when Mirage was revealed, where people were happy that we are finally getting the older style of Assassin's Creed games back. So there are fans all over this franchise, and instead of fighting about what we like and what we don't like, it would be better if we just made peace with each other. And that's what I want out of this video, really. So on the 15th anniversary of Assassin's Creed, if you haven't played it yet, welcome to the franchise. If you have played it, then, well, welcome back. And all that said, let me know down in the comments below, guys. What do you guys think? Do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree? Do let me know down in the comments below. Hit the like button if you like it. Do subscribe to the channel if you want to. And all that said, I will leave you guys in peace.